Hello and welcome back to the book log. Today I'm going to be talking about Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Sometimes all you need for a book to work is just a really good idea. This is now my second Blake Crouch book after having read Recursion a couple years ago, and I think what these two books demonstrate to me more than anything else is that Blake Crouch is just a phenomenal sci-fi idea haver, and not just on a surface level either. He really takes these ideas that are already fascinating on their face and then just takes them completely off-roading, like brings them to the far reaches of their logical possibilities. He's always 3 steps ahead of you. He's always bringing the story to places that you weren't thinking of, even though those places make sense in retrospect. He's thought of everything before you have, and he's able to do all of this while maintaining these incredibly propulsive thriller stories. It's kind of hard for me to talk about Dark Matter without talking about Recursion, even though Dark Matter came out first, because they are very similar books in a lot of ways. They're both high-concept sci-fi action thrillers that are specifically touching on these themes of regret and the choices you make throughout your life and the paths not taken, and asking the question, what if you could change that? Recursion did this using a pretty complicated time travel mechanic. Even saying that it's time travel is a mild spoiler, but it's revealed early, and it is the premise of the entire book. The way it works is that the characters can map a specific memory into a machine, then enter a deprivation tank-like setup where they are lethally injected, and at the exact moment their heart stops, that same memory is reloaded into the brain, and they're jolted alive with adrenaline, and this somehow sends their consciousness back to that point in time, that memory, and then allows them to relive their life from that moment forward. This leads to a bunch of crazy time travel logistics that we don't need to get into here, but Blake Crouch takes this idea and pushes it to its absolute limits, like time travel inside time travel inside time travel, that sort of thing. Dark Matter, which is his first attempt at this sort of thing, I think I actually like a bit better. This time it's not time travel, but alternate realities, like quantum superposition type stuff. Our main character is Jason Desson, a former physicist who now lives a happy, if somewhat boring, domestic life in Chicago with his wife Daniela and their son Charlie. One night while walking home from a bar, he's kidnapped, beaten, taken to a mysterious location, injected with a mysterious substance, and then wakes up in an alternate reality where he eventually discovers that instead of settling down and starting a family, he became a world-class, award-winning quantum physicist. The entire concept is predicated on this idea that every decision you make in your life branches off into a separate reality. Every choice that you personally did not make, another version of you did make and started living life from that point forward. So what happened is that some alternate version of Jason decided to fully pursue his career in quantum physics and ultimately came to regret that choice. So he invented a box that allows you to physically travel between alternate universes. The infinite possibilities of your life based on decisions you never made are now physically accessible. This famous scientist version of Jason uses his invention to find a timeline where he chose to start a family, and then he kidnaps that version of himself, puts him in the box, and then sends him back to the famous scientist timeline, then starts living our Jason's life, essentially like stealing his identity, if you can call it that. His justification is that our Jason, narrator Jason, probably regretted his own decision to abandon his scientific ambitions or whatever, and now he's doing him a favor, letting him live out his dreams. Narrator Jason, of course, did not consent to this arrangement, so the book is framed as being about him trying to navigate his way back to his own reality to take back his stolen life. It's a pretty fascinating idea, and Blake Crouch does spend a lot of time exploring the implications of this sort of thing, but I want to at least briefly mention the science and how it's explained here, because one thing I noticed in both of these Crouch books is that he at least attempts to filter this all through a legitimately plausible, real-life scientific scenario. It starts with a real-world concept from quantum mechanics called superposition. Like, in quantum theory, tiny particles don't settle into a single state or location until they're observed, which is when the wave function describing all their possibilities collapses into one definite outcome. The classic illustration of this is Schrodinger's cat, the thought experiment where a cat in a sealed box can be thought of as both alive and dead at once until someone opens the box and looks at it. In this story, Jason's alternate self takes this idea and pushes it to the extreme question of if you could put a person into a state of superposition where, like, they genuinely exist in all possible versions of themselves at once, then you could, in theory, access the alternate universes that branch off whenever a choice is made. The way his box enables this is by combining two fictional elements. First, it creates a physical environment that isolates the person from outside observation, because any observation, even by another person, would collapse the superposition into a single reality. Second, the person inside is given a drug that shuts down part of the brain's normal functioning in areas that are involved in conscious observation, so their own mind doesn't collapse the wave function either. So basically, with the brain's observer effect muted and no one outside watching, the person in the box has entered a superposed state, which literally manifests as this big corridor of possibilities with hallways and doors and whatnot that you can open into alternate realities. I don't know if I explained that well or accurately at all, but that's the best I can do with it. It's a kind of high concept sort of thing. In my opinion, the first cool direction Blake Crouch takes with this is the whole middle portion of the book, where he's showing us all these different realities that Jason stumbles into through the box. There are many worlds with mostly pretty mundane differences, worlds where him and Daniela did get married but eventually divorced, worlds where Jason died in a car accident a few years ago, worlds where Daniela and him never got married but also didn't become massive successes in art and science. But the real cool stuff, I thought, was all the worlds he stumbles into that are nothing like our current reality, but still technically possible in the multiverse. There's a hyper-advanced utopian version of Chicago where everything is clean and the skyscrapers look like giant crystals. There's a version of Chicago in the midst of a violently deadly worldwide plague where he finds his alternate family on the brink of death. There's a sort of Ice Age apocalypse version where it's freezing cold and everyone is dead and everything is covered under tons of ice and snow. There's like a desolate post-apocalypse world that was very reminiscent of The Road to me, where like the sky is blotted out in a haze and no one's around and the buildings are collapsing as if Chicago has been abandoned for decades. It's just a whirlwind of all these completely different worlds. There is a stipulation that every accessible universe has to be a world where Jason was at least born, but everything else, all other possible machinations of reality are on the table. Another thing Blake Crouch is great at throughout both of his books that I've read is concealing certain implications of things and then revealing them in a way that makes you go, I guess that would happen, wouldn't it? In Dark Matter, this happens when Jason finally does end up finding his way back to his original reality. At first, he thinks it's going to be a simple case of finding the imposter Jason and taking his life back, but not so fast. The multiverse didn't just stop when Jason was kidnapped and brought to the box the first time. No, it continued to branch out into countless more universes where Jason made different choices, traveled through different realities, and as a result, those Jasons are also trying to get back to the original reality with Daniela and Charlie. One of my favorite parts of the whole book is when Jason first gets back to his world and logs into his email account only to find a link to a chat room that is populated with dozens of other Jasons who also found their way back and are trying to get their lives back to normal. It's completely mind-blowing and fascinating, but it's also pretty sad. This whole book is actually very emotional. It's almost a romance in some ways, like Jason is going on this dramatic odyssey through the multiverse just to get his wife back, basically. And when he finally gets to the right spot, there are like 100 other copies of him with the same memories, the same emotions, the literal same life experiences trying to do the same thing. Our narrator, Jason, ends up winning through this scheme he devises to get arrested and use his one phone call to get Daniela to come to the jail where he can explain everything privately, which is great. I'm glad it all worked out for narrator Jason, but it really makes you think about the other ones. They went through all the same stuff only for the rug to get pulled out from under them at the very last second. This is what I like about Blake Crouch in general. Like I said, on the surface, these books are very high concept sci-fi thought experiments, but when you get down to it, he's kind of using the genre as a frame to explore themes that are genuinely pretty heartfelt and thought-provoking. He reminds me a bit of Philip K. Dick in that way, where there's always some philosophical undercurrent to the things that are happening in the story. With Dark Matter, Blake Crouch is asking, is it worth it to live your life with regret? You don't necessarily want every possible version of your life, you want the one you chose, because choice is what creates meaning. The book uses infinite universes to argue kind of the opposite of what you'd expect, which is that having endless options doesn't liberate you, it hollows you out. Jason only understands the value of his boring life, like his marriage and his kid, the specific path he chose, once he's confronted with all the versions where he did something else instead. Dwelling on the quote-unquote better lives out there if you just made different choices can make you miserable in the life that you actually are living. I thought this book was awesome. I really think Blake Crouch is one of the best modern sci-fi authors out there. He can really make you think like not a lot of others can. I think I would give this book a strong 9 out of 10.